Okay, so this is chapter 9. We left off at the end of chapter 8 with Ellie knowing that Jacob was very nervous and so forth, and remember they were looking for the little girl, and they had driven to this spot, and they told Jacob to call for backup, but he decided he was going in. Jacob was afraid. Oh, this is page 81. Jacob was afraid. I could feel the fear rising off him into the air, and it made me nervous. Jacob had been worried sometimes when we were working. He had been serious always, but he had never been scared before, not like this. I galloped back to nudge his hand with my nose. I felt better if I could touch him, but I knew I couldn't stay right next to him. I needed to work. That would make Jacob's fear go away. The girl's scent, faint but clear, pulled me forward, down the slope of the road. The path curved, and I lost sight of Jacob behind me. Ahead of me were a few buildings, scattered across green grass. One of the buildings had steps leading up to a big porch. Up on the porch, a man had his back to me, working on the door with some kind of long metal tool. A little girl was sitting quietly on the steps, huddled back against the railings as if she were cold. But it wasn't a cold day. The sun was hot on my fur, and I was panting. I slowed down a little, heading across the grass at a trot. The girl's sad face brightened a little as she saw me. She sat up and held out her tiny hand. The man whirled around, staring at me. My hackles rose. Hackles are the hair on the back of the dog's neck. My hackles rose when our eyes met, and I felt my lips pulling up to show my teeth. There was something dark inside him, something vicious and wrong. I didn't like the smell of him at all, and I didn't like seeing him so near the little girl. The man jerked his head up, looking back along the road I'd come. I turned and ran back. "Doggie," the girl called after me. My claws digging into the dirt, I sprinted back to Jacob, who was jogging steadily down the road after me. "You got her," he said, after one look at my face. "Good girl, Ellie, show me." He could run nearly as fast as I could. We both tore down the road toward the building. The little girl was still sitting there, looking confused, but the man was nowhere to be seen. 8. Kilo 6. Victim is secured and unharmed. Jacob panted into his walkie-talkie. Suspect fled on foot. Stick with the victim. 8 Kilo 6. Roger that. I could hear in the distance the whop, whop, whop of a helicopter blade beating the air, and then the sound of footsteps running down the road behind us. 2 policemen came around the bend, sweating. "How are you, Emily?" one of them said, running up to the girl. He was careful not to touch her, and he knelt down, bringing his face closer to hers. "Are you hurt?" "No," said the little girl. She picked at a flower on her dress. "Is she all right? Are you okay, little girl?" A third police officer had come running, slower than the other 2. He was panting for breath, and he put his hands on his knees. He was larger than the other 2, both taller and heavier. I smelled ice cream on his breath. "Her name is Emily," the first policeman said. Jacob had been standing close to me watching. The little girl looked up at him, and a shy smile touched her face. "Can I pet the doggie?" she asked. I felt Jacob's relief and the worst of the fear vanishing in the warm sun. That's how I knew I'd done the work right, even though it had been strange trying to find in the truck. I wagged my tail. "Yes, sure," Jacob said kindly to Emily. "Then we've got to get back to work." My ears picked up at the word work. Emily stroked my head and smiled. She wasn't scared anymore either. I licked her fingers quickly. I could still feel a sternness in Jacob, even while he smiled down at Emily. We weren't done. Somehow I knew it. "Okay, I'll go with you," said the big policeman. He was still breathing hard. "John, you guys remain here with the girl. Watch that he doesn't circle back around. If he were close, Ellie would tell us, Jacob said. I looked up at him. Were we ready? I was ready. Was it time? Find, Jacob said. I leaped ahead into the bushes. The brush was thick in spots, the soil underneath sandy and loose. I could track the man easily, though. The trail was fresh. He was headed steadily downhill. The smell was sharp and strong in a stand of tall grass. I ran back to Jacob. Show me, he said, and followed. I took him to the grass and to the iron rod hidden there, coated with the man's unpleasant scent. Jacob and I had to wait more than a couple of minutes for the other policeman to catch up with us. I fell a couple of times, he gasped. I could smell his embarrassment and the thick sweat dripping off of him. Ellie says he was carrying this crowbar, Jacob reported tensely. Looks like he dropped his weapon. Okay, now what? Find, Jacob commanded. I dashed ahead, leaving the two men to follow. The man's scent was painted on bushes and hanging in the air, and it wasn't long before I could hear him scuffling through the leaves and the rough grass. I ran more quickly. The breeze from ahead grew damp, bringing me his smell more strongly. I pushed through a thorny bush into a little clearing. The air was moist from a tiny stream, and the trees lifted their limbs high overhead, letting shade fall gently on the ground. He saw me and ducked behind one of those trees, just like Wally used to do. But Wally had never fooled me, and this man with the dark, bitter smell could not fool me either. I turned and ran back to Jacob. Show me, he said. I stayed close to Jacob as he pushed his way through the brush and saplings back to where I'd left the man. Jacob and I stepped out into the little clearing. I could hear the stream trickling over the stones. I knew where the man was hiding. I could smell his fear and his hate and his angry scent. I led Jacob toward the tree. The man stepped out into the sunlight. I heard Jacob shout, "Police! Freeze!" The man raised his hand, and there was a noise as sharp as a thunderclap. Just a gun. I knew about guns. Jacob had shown me guns were okay. Noise couldn't hurt me. Noise could not hurt anybody. But I sensed a flash of pain from Jacob, and he fell to the ground. I smelled blood, warm and salty, and I heard his gun clatter away over roots and rocks. The man took another step forward, his arm still out, the gun still pointed at Jacob and at me. I sensed the man's pleasure, saw his gloating smile. I didn't know how, but somehow this man had hurt Jacob. He used the gun to make that noise, and now Jacob was on the ground. Behind me, Jacob gasped for breath. I didn't growl, I just lowered my head and charged. The gun made its terrible noise 2 more times, and then I had the man's wrist in my mouth. His weapon fell with a soft thump into the dust. It couldn't make that loud sound now, the sound that could hurt people, that had hurt Jacob so badly. The man screamed at me, and I held on, shaking my head violently, as if he were my prey. My teeth broke his skin and tore into the muscles of his arm. His foot smacked into my ribs, but I did not let my jaw loosen. "Let go!" he yelled. "Police! Freeze!" shouted another voice. It was the big policeman, shoving his way out from behind a bush. Whew. All right, we're going to stop there. That's the bottom of page 80, and part 2 will start with that was the bottom of page 86, and part 2 will start with the bottom of page 80, top of 87. What do you think is going to happen?